Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Some of you might be aware I'm Martin McAvoy and I'm from Signium, Ireland, and really delighted to welcome you all to this evening. Just to give you the order of play, I'll start with a few words, hopefully not too many. I've been briefed, and I'll then introduce the Signium interview with our gracious guest, Imelda Hurley, who's CEO of Coillte. We're going to follow that by a brief Q&A session from the floor, and finish with an introduction to our charity partner this evening, the Together Academy, and its founder, Therese Coveney, will say a few words. You may have noticed that we have Raf here running around taking photos and video, so hopefully you're not too camera shy. And given that everybody at that stage will have sung for their supper, our food will be served probably around about 7:30, we hope, and that'll allow us for further networking, either here or back in the reserve. So just a few words to Signium Ireland. From the start, I guess it's been an interesting 30 years, which has included .com to .bomb, the shock of 9/11 with high growth and crash-style economic cycles, and even more recently the pandemic, I guess. And resilience is the key, but perhaps a couple of moments to reflect on the origin of our services, which I suppose in terms of how they were motivated and maybe enabled by a cocktail of a few things. Firstly, I suppose it was motivated by frustration of my previous agency life of trying to satisfy client requirements for important leadership roles from a database typically populated by people who are on the market with varying reasons for their availability. So it became evident to me that the best available talent in the market wasn't necessarily on a database. So the best solution for critical strategic hires would be to build a professional, real-time, research-based approach which was properly resourced to satisfy clients' needs. And this allied, I guess, to a confidential reach-out and engagement model would enable us to source and provide really rich shortlists for clients. The idea being that we would deliver the best available talent for a role rather than the best available person looking for a job, and there's a big difference. Secondly, from an enablement perspective, I guess, a couple of conversations with our long-term advisor and confidant who's in the room today, Liam Ryan, on the logic of the proper executive search model, the establishment risks, etc. And critically, I guess, when no one else would risk leasing a decent premises to a startup back in 1995, Liam's firm also kindly sublet us our first premises. So thanks again, Liam, for that. Thirdly, from a personal perspective, my then 6-year-old daughter, hearing the chat at the kitchen table, asking if I was happy in work, a question which required the unvarnished truth, not something you'd necessarily give a cocktail party answer to. And I answered, well, not really. She said, well, why don't you do something different? So that was kind of an interesting time, because we had one single income, an oversized mortgage, and 3 kids at 6 and under. So based on Chloe's straw question that broke the camel's back, we just had to man up and take the plunge. So that was an interesting time. And yeah, I did work that into our wedding speech as well, by the way. Throughout the growth of the business, we never really lost sight of the duty of care to being values-based, from a client service and long-term value to both hiring client organizations into people that are known as candidates, but we invade their lives. They haven't been looking for a job. We go and ask them to engage with us in a serious way. And maybe just to bring this to life, I'd like to reference a note I received literally last Friday, which says, Martin, just a short note to say thank you for that call over 18 years ago. Sometimes I'm sure you pick a good one. Life is strange and full of chance, but I always remember what you said on our first call, which connected with something for me at the time. And then life and chance took over. Many thanks. I hope you're keeping well. So that was from a guy called Dean O'Sullivan, who we originally placed at Gypsum, which is part of Saint-Gobain, as head of sales for Ireland in 2007. And he has since been promoted across 8 different roles and is now CEO of Saint-Gobain UK and Ireland. It's an entity with 5,500 employees. So I think the lifetime value is good there. And I guess it's moments like that, I suppose, receiving that note that makes it all worthwhile. Over the years, we've had some fantastic colleagues, clients and candidates, and would like to express our huge thanks to every one of you for your continued support and partnership. And on a personal note, obviously from start to finish, throughout all of this, I and all of our colleagues over the years have had an unerring and deeply resilient support of our families. None more so than my way better half, Arlene. Thank you. A key learning for us has been to avoid a transactional mindset and never underestimate the enduring power of partnership relationships, values-based judgment, and trust with people. This obviously applies to colleagues, to service providers, clients, and candidates who probably were not looking for career improvement outside their current organization until we contacted them. So I guess looking back to when we were all 30 years of age, we probably knew we weren't the complete article, and so it is with us. As I often say, our faces are on the front of our head to look forward. So let's continue to drive onwards and upwards while always remembering the enduring power of values-based judgment, trust, and relationships. Many thanks. It's now my great pleasure to invite Jim and Imelda to come to the dais. And for those of us who are not familiar with Imelda, she was appointed as CEO of Coillte in 2019 and has a wide range of experience across a number of sectors. And prior to Coillte has worked extensively in Ireland, the UK, Eastern Europe and Asia Pacific with organisations such as Origin Enterprises, PCH and Greencore. Originally an Arthur Anderson trained accountant, she also served as non-executive director of Total Produce PLC, Vallejo Foods and Ervia Bord Gáis. She's currently a non-exec director with Dole PLC and a non-executive director and past president of IBEC. Interestingly, Imelda is also a patron of Chapter Zero Ireland, a community of non-executive directors that lead Irish boardroom discussions on the impact of climate change. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Jim and hopefully gain some insights from Imelda on her career and life to date.
That's fantastic. Montreal, it's lovely. That's great. Welcome, Imelda. It's great to have you here. Thanks very much for participating. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me. And if I may start by congratulating Signium on 30 years. It's wonderful to see a business grow and evolve and stay so relevant over that period of time.
You're very honest. Thank you. And tell me, we'll start with a softball question. How did you come to work for Coillte?
When I step back, all my life I wanted to run something. I can't put my finger on the why of that. But when I entered the business world, that became a desire to be a CEO and the desire to run a business. And ultimately, when the CEO role at Coillte became vacant, I really started thinking about back to my own childhood, to walks in Castlefreak Wood in West Cork, which is a Coillte property, but also to a sawmilling business in Inniskeen, known as Granger's. It's one of the large sawmills and it remains in existence today. And that captured my imagination and got me thinking more about Coillte. And I really, I suppose, looked at it further. For me, the organisation with a commercial remit must stand absolutely on its own 2 feet, must pay financial dividends to the state, but also social dividends to society. I felt it was quite a unique proposition, and the opportunity to be in a commercial organisation that can ultimately deliver, so much social good as well. It resonated with my own value set, and it captured my imagination in a way that I really, I really wanted that role, and I was delighted to be appointed. And I have to say, thoroughly enjoy every day. Very, very challenging at times, but I've never looked back.
It's certainly a unique role. One of the things we learned about you as an organisation when we first did some work for you was that you have something called a 100-year plan, which is pretty unique, I think, in the business world. Most organisations struggle to think beyond 1 year or 3 years. Tell us a bit about that long-term thinking that kind of imbues a lot of what goes on in Coillte.
Yeah. The framing and
thought that's needed for a forestry business is worth talking about for a couple of minutes, because it really frames why we need a 100-year plan and even how we go about doing it. Forestry, by its nature, is just very, very long term. If we're growing a tree that is for productive purposes, for wood processing to help to deliver a sustainable home, that tree needs to grow for 30 to 40 years to reach maturity. So the actions we take today really come to full fruition over 30 to 40 years. If we're growing a tree, which is a broadleaf tree, it will live for decades and decades and decades longer. And therefore, we have to really plan for the future in a way that perhaps other organisations don't to the same extent, because if we don't undertake the actions we need today, there are implications at a point in the future. And against that backdrop, we absolutely see the volatility in the world, I would say, like every organisation. We look back and think about the year before COVID as being perhaps the last really normal year, and there have been loads of different challenges for every industry since then. And our own industry has had challenges where we've had too little supply, and indeed we now, following Storm Éowyn, have a very big supply, and pardon me, when I say supply, I mean supply of productive timber. So we need, against all of that, a backdrop that forces a plan and a vision for the future. And we set about setting that vision in 2020, and it took us a 2-year period to really become absolutely clear. And I'd just make a couple of points in relation to how we went about it and how it frames the work we do every day. We know that it's really easy that the important issues of the day or the urgent issues can overtake the important issues. And clarity of purpose is something that forces you to ensure that the important detail is always considered. So we worked as an organisation right through 2020 to become clear in our purpose and identified that it is to manage the state forests on behalf of the people of Ireland. So we're managing state forests, but very much thinking about the people of Ireland and the expectations that are on us. And those expectations are determined by our shareholders, they're determined by the Programme for Government, and they're determined by the citizens of Ireland. And the expectations in terms of the world, climate action, biodiversity loss, the need for sustainable homes, the need for great recreation and outdoor facilities. And from there, we looked forward to identify a plan which is rooted in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and mapping the values of Coillte and forestry. We identified that 9 of the United Nations goals apply to us, and we summarised them into 4 strategic pillars that are pivotal to our 100-year plan. We talked today about forests that are for climate, for nature, for wood, and for people. But we couldn't still say that, well, that was a clear plan. That was a set of strategic pillars we needed to measure against. So we identified from there a balance as to how we would ensure that we would optimise our delivery against each of the pillars while remaining absolutely commercially sound and commercially viable and successful, continuing to deliver sustainable timber for sustainable homes, but doing more in terms of the other ambitions. I'll give you maybe 3 examples then in terms of, well, what are the ambitions and how long-term are they? Our first ambition is absolutely critical, is that we continue to deliver productive timber, to deliver sustainable homes. And everything in our long-term plan is focused on consistency of supply while balancing and optimising the other objectives. Against that backdrop, when we were creating the vision, we had 20% of the estate managed for nature and biodiversity as its primary objective. And we set an objective that by the end of 2025, we would have increased the area of the estate managed for nature to 30% and to 50% in the long term. And the long term looks out that 100 years. I am delighted to say that we have achieved that objective to 2025, where we've allocated an additional 44,000 hectares of Coillte land, or about 100,000 acres, to increase the area from 20 to 30%. So that first step has been achieved, and that is achieved while not impacting the productive timber that we deliver. And another objective that I would highlight is that we're really focused on supporting decarbonising the built environment. In 2022, when we launched the vision, only 20% approximately of Irish homes are timber frame. And we have an objective to get that to 80 by 2050. So just yesterday, we ran our third Build with Wood conference since we launched the vision. And that's very focused on promoting the use of Irish homegrown timber in Ireland. So that, I suppose, frames where some of the ambitions come from, but also hopefully the need for Coillte to have a long-term plan.
And I think what comes through when you meet people from across your organisation is that sustainability is right there at the top. Right up there with financial objectives and everything else. And it resonates, including in the manufacturing environment. I saw Gillian, I think Alan here tonight. Like, everybody you talk to, from the top to the bottom, it's imbued and it's in their mindset. What would you say, thinking more broadly externally, are some of the opportunities and challenges for business leaders, and particularly Irish business leaders, around really embedding some of those ESG principles in their organisations?
Yeah, I would say you're right. ESG is very much in sustainability. It's at the absolute heart of Coillte as an organisation, and it's really obvious as to why it would be environmental, social governance. When I think more broadly and I think about the leadership challenge, I think that sustainability, ESG, it may well ebb and flow. It might be somewhat considered in vogue in some geographies and in some ownership structures, and in others it may at the moment, for whatever reason, be something that's not thought about in the same way. From my point of view, in terms of, well, how do you embed sustainability and ESG in an organisation? I think a leader needs to stand back and think about the organisation, think about its purpose, what it's trying to achieve, its ownership structure, its geography, its customers, and consider how ESG fits into all of that, and indeed what is absolutely appropriate from an organisational point of view. I'd also challenge business leaders to think about their own value set and what they fundamentally believe is important, because being a leader or a CEO comes with an immense responsibility. And I think once you've answered those questions, organisations are then better set to embed sustainability into their organisation when they have figured out the answer to that broader question as to why it's important.
Makes sense. And certainly purpose-driven organisations tend to outperform. So there is a virtuous circle.
Absolutely.
Sure.
We see it in Coillte. It's very challenging at the moment following Storm Éowyn. But because we're clear on our purpose and our ambitions, we're dealing with the operational challenge, but we're also working very hard to deliver on our long-term vision and purpose.
Very good. Changing gear a little bit, one of the interesting things in your background was you went out to China with PCH. Tell me a little bit about that. How did it come about, and what do you think you learned from that experience?
There's a funny story as to how it came about, and for anyone in the room who might know Liam Casey, I think you'll know that I'm not the only person that has a story as to how they ended up in China working for Liam. I had worked in Greencore for about 10 years, and I just knew it was time for a change. It had been my first job following professional practice, and it had been absolutely super. But I also knew I wanted to do something new. And I had a couple of phone calls about people saying to me, you should look at this job in Cork. You're from Cork. Liam Casey has got this amazing business in China, and he needs a CFO in Cork. And in my own mind, Cork was actually the problem. I felt that if I was to get that job and move to Cork, I'd probably spend the rest of my days there. And I mightn't really achieve all that I'd like to achieve in life. But there was something about PCH and Liam Casey and the story of what he had achieved. He set out on his own, and there he was 20 years later employing a couple of thousand people in China, one of the top 7 assemblers to Apple on the world, and with a potential plan to raise more capital either on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange or in Silicon Valley. So I decided I'd go to Cork to meet Liam.
Very good.
And I did. And I met Liam for an hour. And Liam literally talked China, China, China. And in my mind, all I could think about is that this job is in Cork. So eventually, politely, but in a straight talking way, I asked Liam, where exactly is this job based? The job's in China, was literally what he said to me. And in that moment, I remember, think if you could see what was going on in my head across my forehead, seriously? And I explained, I thought the job was in Cork. And his line was, well, Cork or China, what's the difference? Come out to China. Literally. He literally said, come out to China, come for a weekend. You've never been there, have you? And I hadn't been. So I did go to China. I met people in the organization. I got a sense of the culture of the organization, the value set of the organization, organizational purpose, the importance of sustainability and what they were trying to achieve. And 3 months later, I had moved to Hong Kong. I was living between Hong Kong and China. I was CFO and I'd been appointed head of sustainability for that organization. My world was absolutely turned upside down, but it was fantastic. It knocked, speaking frankly, all the corners off me, and I probably needed a few corners knocked off me. And what I learned over that time was so much about culture, so much about international business, and so much about leadership. I had a finance team from numerous geographies. Some spoke some English. I didn't speak Cantonese. I don't have good French. There was all this going on, but somehow we had to figure out how to be a team and how to communicate and how to deal with a really entrepreneurial, fast-paced business. My team got English lessons, and I got really good at figuring out how to communicate and manage. And I would say charades literally featured. There was lots of pointing and there was lots of figuring out and there was lots of funny moments. But more than anything, what I saw was that when you have a really diverse team, people that think differently from different geographies, from different cultures, different age profiles, you get way better outcomes. And I came to hugely learn about and respect the importance of diverse teams. And I was really the one who looked different and who didn't speak the right languages. And from a global business perspective, Liam had started off very much himself in a suitcase and traveled to China, but he had built a business based on international opportunities and spotting at that time what was relevant. The phrase was geography is history. 10, 11 years on, I think geography is absolutely everything. And organizations now have to evolve so much to stay relevant, but it was a huge learning experience at the time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And tell me, tips for, you said you wanted, from when you went into business, you wanted to be a CEO, you wanted to run something. What would be some of your tips for aspiring CEOs?
Mm-hmm. I'd start by saying I think people need to go into a CEO role with their eyes wide open. It is a huge privilege, but it is also an immense responsibility and an immense challenge. So be sure you want it is the first thing. From there, in order to be a CEO, my experience has been that it's important to get very diverse experience, and that can be gained in one organization with a lot of different roles, or indeed in different organizations, and ideally, I think, in different geographies. I would say that time in China was hugely challenging, but I learned so much, and it changed my way of thinking, and it shaped me into the leader that I've ultimately become. So that would be the first piece. Build that career engine of experience, because you're going to need it on the day you're the CEO and there's a crisis. The second thing I would absolutely say is lifelong learning is critical for all roles, but definitely to get to that CEO role and to have the CEO mindset. I'm always reading leadership books. I dip in and out of chapters, but I also from time to time look at set pieces. I think back to my days in PCH. I wasn't around that long, and a few months in, the Silicon Valley-backed directors thought that I was way too worried about losing money. So I was dispatched to Stanford to spend time with Silicon Valley-backed businesses to get used to just this bet big, win big, fail fast mentality that can exist. So I had to learn that. and I came back to China with a whole new language. We were growing into our overheads. So there's that piece of learning. Learning, genuinely, that is a line that I learned. And years later, many years later, I knew that I had really seen my CEO life through, or CFO life through. I had done so many month ends that I wanted something new. And I took some time, I spent some time in Harvard, did the advanced management program there, and really looked at what are the things that will differentiate me as a candidate to be a CEO. That course, I think, really reshaped my thinking, but also I did some travel and did some things on my bucket list that were important to me to get me ready, but also to take a break from being in the role that I had been in for so long and in that functional piece. And the final piece that I would say is it's hard to get a CEO role. There are only so many. And I would encourage people to think about career success along the way and the journey and enjoy it. In due course, hopefully the right role will emerge, but it's really important that the journey is enjoyable, that you learn a lot and become the leader that you can aspire to be, whether you hold a CEO role or indeed a very senior leadership team role. The team I work with every day, I consider us a team of equals. They bring fantastic functional experience, and together we make the organisation work.
It's a nice philosophy. One of the things, as well as the China thing, the other thing that jumped out to me when I was thinking about your career journey that's maybe distinct from a lot of leaders was early board experience. So I'm obviously you're on Dole and some others now, but you were in board, gosh, like 15 years ago. That's very early for board experience. Tell me about how did that come about, and what do you think you brought from that into your executive career?
So I was appointed in 2010 by Minister Ryan at the time to Board Gosh, and I'd been asked to go and meet Minister Ryan as I understand it, a group of candidates for potential board roles, one of which was Board Gosh. And when I was appointed, I initially joined the board, and within a couple of months, I had been appointed chair of the audit committee. And it's very clear to me now that my background in finance, my background in the PLC world, good, strong understanding of governance and what it takes to run a business were critical components of my experience that the board in Board Gosh were ultimately looking for, and they had knowledge that they would need a new audit committee chair. What followed on from that was a period of time where very soon after I was appointed to Board Gosh, I'd moved to Hong Kong and China. But I stayed on the board because I believe you cannot make a commitment to a board and then step away very quickly. So my reality was that I would fly home and look important from a governance point of view to say at no cost to Board Gosh. PCH kindly made sure that I could stay on my in that role. I'd pick up my board papers on a Saturday morning, read them over the weekend, be in PCH on Monday and turn up for the board meeting later in the week. So you do some of the hard yards, but my non-executive experience, I think, has been critical to how I think about my executive role and indeed how I engage as an executive with our board in Coillte. What I've learned more than anything is that non-executives bring immense experience and a wealth of experience, and I would say more so when they have quite an amount of executive experience themselves. And executives need to really lean in and benefit from non-executive experience and indeed be willing to hear the tough questions, not be defensive about them, be willing to answer them, to take those questions away and really think about how those questions should influence the thinking for an organisation. That's absolutely fundamental to me as a key point. The second thing I would say in terms of non-exec experience is that I think about my executive role, and I know that the board in Coillte and many of the board are here this evening. The board have a remit. There's a set of responsibilities that are reserved for the board. And then there's a set of responsibilities for the executive. And in an organisation like Coillte, when you have 7% of Ireland's land under management, there are going to be things somewhere in that kind of grey space. And what's absolutely clear is that you keep the board briefed You keep the chair briefed between meetings and the board. If you need an email to keep the board updated, absolutely. But anything that's in that we're not absolutely sure space, always lean in and engage with the board and make sure everybody's clear and everyone's happy with how matters like that are being dealt with. And the third thing, particularly when somebody perhaps goes into a board on one occasion, they'll often leave a board meeting and might ask, why is the board asking that question? I mean, it's not really, they don't really need to know that. But being a non-exec myself, I'm really able to, I believe, articulate well, look, that's important because a board holds ultimate responsibility. And ultimately, that means that we should be comfortable to answer anything for the board. And in a state organisation, we always have to be able to answer the why we do what we do for our board, but also for stakeholders generally. So a non-executive role takes work, but it brings, I think, an immense lens from a leadership point of view that's hugely helpful. And I would really also like to take the opportunity just to acknowledge the amount of work that non-execs, for instance, on Coillte do. It's hugely important and much appreciated.
Absolutely, absolutely. One other interesting thing I found about it was the mountain climbing. You've climbed all over, including like Mount Kilimanjaro and others. What's so compelling for you about mountain climbing?
Well, I love adventure and I love the outdoors. So I'd start there and I'd say mountain climbing, it really came from walking first and then hiking and then wanting to do something a bit more challenging. So some beginning high altitude hiking, going to places like Machu Picchu. And then in more recent years, I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and I've also climbed Mount Elbrus, which is considered to be the highest mountain in Europe. It's in the Caucasus. My feet are always on the ground. So most people, when they hear mountaineering, they think people are going vertically up. My feet are on the ground, but we are going up at pace. So it's just very challenging, but also gives me a sense of adventure. From a day-to-day point of view, it gives a great balance between a busy executive role and the need to train for an adventure. You cannot go to somewhere like Elbrus or Kilimanjaro without doing the training. And it's a great foil to have that adventure in front of me and say, you know, I've got to train for that. So a couple of mornings a week, my alarm does go off at 5:30 in the morning. And I have a short conversation in my mind. Are you going to the gym? Are you going doing that adventure? And suddenly I'm in the gym. I take a leadership lesson out of this as well. When we were in Elbrus, everything that could possibly go wrong on that expedition went wrong. However, we had meticulously planned our gear and brought everything we needed with us. We had an excellent expedition team, a local team from Ireland, an Irish GP, and a local guide who was really strict in terms of what we would and would not do. And that planning meant that while that expedition was ongoing, we were the only team on the mountain that made the summit.
Wow.
And there were a number of other teams who didn't. It was that piece of, if you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. If you don't have the right team around you, that's going to become a problem as well. And then I would say building on that further, every day on that expedition, despite the challenges, we made progress. Some days it was slow progress, some days it was a lot. And certainly in life, I think, and in business, if you take small steps forward, no matter how difficult it is, it's amazing the progress you make over time.
Very good. Yeah, the resilience is absolutely key. And are there other kind of I wouldn't call it a habit, but there are habits, philosophies that you find helpful for kind of, I suppose, self-motivation?
Yeah. Somewhere in me, I have this just motivational streak, if I'd say it's innate in me, but I would describe it in a way from a leadership point of view of always looking to be that 1% better, always being ambitious to do that a little bit more, to try that, something that's a little bit different, and to push forward and to try to make a change or to try to find a route forward. And albeit digressing, in recent times, I've been following a hammer thrower from West Cork who, Nicola Tuttle, she made the Olympics recently at the World Championships. And she's 21 or 22, she's very young, but she is always in her interviews saying, I just want to be that little bit better. And it really resonates with me in terms of always pushing forward. I'd say that's one of the characteristics. Another is I am not at all afraid of hard work, but I believe you've got to work smart as well as being willing to put in the hours. And that balance of trying to work smart and hard, you do make progress as a leader, but also I would then say you've got to balance that with something that you love to do yourself. That's the outdoors, nature, getting out for a hike, all of that, to bring that balance, to make sure that leaders have to stay sharp, they have to stay fresh. And I would say they're two absolutely critical philosophies. I might call them philosophies, or just ways of leading that I have. And the third that I would point to is the philosophy of team. None of us succeed on our own. And definitely, when I think about Coillte, when you have 7% of Ireland's land under management, the diversity of what we're dealing with, the community queries that come in, the engagements with the ministers, the need to run conferences, all of the different aspects of our business, we are hugely reliant on having a great team. And therefore, my focus from a leadership point of view is having the best possible team around me and giving them the opportunity to continue to grow and develop as well as leaders, because a CEO at some level shouldn't be afraid of almost making themselves redundant by having that brilliant team.
Absolutely. And that's probably a nice segue into, if you were to pick maybe one thing, and it's always difficult, but one thing you're particularly proud of in your career, right? And I'm going to give you a two-part question. On the flip side of that, if there was one decision that you've made that you would change, what would those things be?
There have been some, I'm fortunate I can look back and there have been some really exciting days in my career, but they mightn't have been the most important. But to give you a sense of it, or not they mightn't, they weren't. I had the privilege of welcoming the entire Cabinet of Ireland to Avondale. They had a Cabinet meeting in Avondale House. That's just unique. And very recently, I had the opportunity to welcome the Taoiseach and the European Trade Commissioner to Avondale again, where they had really important meetings there. And they're days that I really enjoy. But the day that I'm most proud of is the day that we launched the new vision for Coiltte's Forests and Lands. It was 2 years in the making. We were under tremendous pressure as an organisation. There was a lot of people asking, why is Coillte not doing more for climate or for nature? What is Coillte doing? The realities was that we were working on a science and data-led plan that had to stand up to absolute scrutiny when we launched it, and that stakeholders and citizens of Ireland would buy into. So that day proved to be the day that I'm absolutely most proud of, because when I joined, I had wanted to set that new vision. And it was endorsed a few months later by the President of Ireland when he officially launched Beyond the Trees Avondale. And to just sit there and hear the President of Ireland endorse our vision, it was huge for us. The whole team, you know, we were on a, if I could say we were on a high, it was just that moment of we're on the right path.
Brilliant.
In terms of something that I would change, perhaps, I came home from Asia too soon, in my view. I had spent 3 fantastic years there. Every month, the reality was that I was flying around the world. It was either Cork, Hong Kong, San Francisco, or Cork, San Francisco, Hong Kong. And that does get very tiring. But the experience that I got in Asia was absolutely fantastic. I did come home to a great role, CFO of Origin Enterprises, a public company. Always wanted to be the CFO of a public company, but it all just happened really fast. And suddenly I was home. And I do think a few more years in Asia would have been great.
Very good. Very good. If you hadn't gone into business, what do you think you would have done?
I'm going to give a 2-part answer.
Okay.
So early in my life, I worked in the Coillte Black Pudding Company. Well, I started off babysitting for the family and then became a little bit involved in the business in my teenage years. And I have always been fascinated by entrepreneurs and those who set up a business. So from a business point of view, sometimes I think I'd love to have set up a business. What was the alternative career? I did a project for career guidance when I was in secondary school, and that was to be a PE teacher. And I do think that my love for the outdoors and nature is my way of channeling that interest in the world I live in today.
Well, I'm glad that didn't happen.
You know, I'm probably glad too. I'm
so.
uniquely privileged in the role I get to do, and I really enjoy it. But good to have an eye on other things as well.
IBEC. We haven't
Yes.
touched on IBEC. A number of people in the room will have probably had a lot of engagement with you when you were president or on the board of IBEC more broadly. What did you, the year you were president in particular, what did you want to get out of the year and how did you find that year?
Yeah. It was a real privilege to be appointed president of IBEC. It's something that I probably just never had thought might happen. But I wanted to do two things. First of all, as an INED with a good amount of experience, I wanted to make sure that I was going to stay in my lane. And what do I mean by that? IBEC has a president, IBEC has a chair of the board, it has a CEO. And it's important, I think, that everyone knows their role. And particularly where a president is appointed for 1 year, I wanted to make sure I did what the president was to do and not step into other areas that weren't appropriate. So in that regard, there's a real leadership role and a presidential role where you lead the delegation that goes to Washington every year for St. Patrick's Day and all the engagements that happen there. You attend Council of President meetings across, which are all of the presidents of the large business organisations across Europe. Chaired National Council meetings, which is a group of the overall membership of IBEC. So that's one set piece that absolutely needs to happen. I also wanted to ensure that I had an agenda and something that I would champion. And I set out my stall at the President's Dinner in 2022. It was the first normal President's Dinner in a couple of years. And the reality was my first ever IBEC President's Dinner. So there I was. I spoke about a couple of things that evening and I followed through on them for the entirety of my presidency. I wanted the year to focus on Ireland from a point of view of achievement, of progress and of growth, despite the challenges that we were dealing with. We'd just come out of the pandemic. As such, cost of living was a huge challenge. Energy security and indeed the cost of energy were fundamental challenges at that time. And I also wanted to ensure that the important issues of our time were brought to the fore because I was pretty certain that the urgent issues would get plenty of focus. So I did bring a focus on sustainability and also on the importance of decarbonising the built environment. And I did take the opportunity to speak about forestry, to speak about Coillte, and to speak about how Ireland's forests can support decarbonising the built environment. We're a relatively small industry, but also a growing and really important industry. So I took that opportunity as well.
Very good, very good. Yeah, it feels like relative to other countries, IBEC has done a great job of having the ear of government and vice versa.
Absolutely. I have that lens from the Council of Presidents, where I've met lots of other presidents from across Europe, and they speak very highly of the role of IBEC that it plays on the Council of Presidents of Europe, but are hugely interested in how IBEC engages with government and with key stakeholders, really looking to learn from it. Sitting around the IBEC board table and the National Council table and having been president, but also working in a state organisation, I really see and know the importance of engagement, how things get done, how you need to navigate the political system, build coalitions, build alliance. And I would absolutely say that the IBEC executive team do a superb job in that regard, and something that from a business point of view, I think is hugely important. And as a member of Forest Industries Ireland, from a Coillte point of view, we see it as a critical role.
Absolutely. I'm conscious of getting to a few questions, but one last one, Louis. So you're going to host a dinner party. You can have 6 guests, alive or dead. Who would you have there and why?
So I'm going to start with Shackleton. I've just finished listening to the Audible book for endurance. So for anyone that doesn't know Shackleton, he attempted to sail to the Antarctic and he literally got iced in the ship. It took a huge amount of time to ultimately get released. The ship sank, but the whole team that went with him ultimately survived, and it is one of the great tales of survival. So I'd absolutely have to have Shackleton. Next, Michael Collins. Michael Collins grew up very near Clonakilty in West Cork. That's home. Home for me is the term I'd use. And I didn't come to fully appreciate what Michael Collins had done until the centenary celebrations. What he did for Ireland, I believe, was extraordinary, so I'd have to have him there. Next, I would go to one of our presidents, Mary Robinson. I think she was a wonderful president. She has gone on to be one of the elders, champions climate action and humanitarian causes. So I would include her. Next, I'd include someone from my own family. I had one of my aunts. She was a nun. She spent 27 years in Nigeria. And it was only at her funeral mass that we really heard what she had done in Nigeria. And I regret not having had time to really engage with her. But what I heard about Elma, and actually originally known as Sister Imelda, which is where my name came from, when her superiors went back to Ireland, Elma would do things like knock walls, buy land, build schools, and attempt to change things. So it was, commit the sin and confess after. So I would have to include her. I would then go to David Attenborough. It would be difficult not to include him as an amazing environmentalist. He's achieved so much in his lifetime and brings a lens in terms of 100 years of change, really. I think the table could sound really, really serious. So we're going to add Graham Norton. He's going to bring a bit of fun. He's going to bring a bit of excitement.
Bit of Cork bias now.
Absolutely. But you see, and then I'm always pushing for one more or a little bit more, just that little
You're
bit.
allowed.
So I would add Michelle Obama. I think she's wonderfully engaging. She's a wonderful storyteller. And my ask, because if I did get to invite them to dinner, I would ask that they would engage as a group in terms of what's the one thing that we could do to really help change the world for the better. And I'd ask Michelle Obama and Graham Norton to find a way of the art of telling the story of the conversation. And for my own part, I'd add good food. Mightn't cook it myself, I'll be honest, and some good wine to ensure that it was a great evening.
Geez, I'd love to be there. That's fantastic.
So we'll invite you too.
Thank you. One more. I'm going to invite Martin back up here and we'll do a bit of Q&A.
Thank you so much, Imelda. Thank you. We've got time for 2 or 3 questions, so I'd like to call on Cian and Orla from Together Academy to grab the microphones and maybe have a look and see, can we see anybody holding their hands up? It's difficult in the light. Anybody brave enough to ask the first question? Here you go, at the front. We've got a gentleman here. Now, if you might, when the microphone arrives to you, if you wouldn't mind just telling us your name and your organization as well, please, that'd be great. Thank you. Here you go. Thanks, Orla.
Hi, Imelda. My name is Dave Smith, currently looking for my next CEO role. I'd love to hear a little bit about your view on culture, the role of a CEO in curating and nurturing culture, and particularly now in a state organisation and arguably one of the most dynamic state organisations?
I'd start by saying I think leadership fundamentally comes from the top. It comes from the board every day. It comes from the CEO. And CEOs have a real opportunity to shape culture. But culture takes time to evolve. When I think about culture, I then think about the word respect. And as a CEO, more than anything, I believe people in an organization deserve respect. And that needs to be clearly delivered in subtle ways by the CEO every single day in the way that, for instance, I engage across the organization. I'm always focused on ensuring that I engage at all levels of the organization and sent a very clear signal. I was about a week in Coillte. There was one of the team, he manages the grounds, he's a forester. I went into the canteen, he was sitting on his own, and I grabbed a cup of coffee. I was busy, but I sat down with him. And that was me in that moment telling the whole organization that I'm going to treat everybody the same. And we had a quick conversation for 10 minutes, but that message absolutely got out. I think secondly, there is that phrase that culture beats strategy. And I think culture can be strategy, but if you put purpose into the middle of that equation, purpose-driven organizations, you'll evolve the culture towards the purpose and the strategy will also come together. So culture, absolutely critical. Lead from the top as a CEO. And that word respect more than anything. I think if organizations get respect right in their culture, an awful lot evolves from it. After that, organizations can have a culture of being really commercial or really tough or really fair. But find that lens as a CEO and be sure of what you stand for.
Thank you. Here we go. Orla or Cian, if you have a microphone. Again, name and
It's Mark Redmond Coaching. First of all, thanks a million for a fantastic evening. Great conversation, Imelda and Jim. And Imelda, my question is, I think it's terrific that you have moved from private to public sector, state sector. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can encourage more fluidity between the private and public state sectors.
It's a great question, Mark. I will say throughout my career, I never thought I'd work in the state sector. And that's speaking very frankly. My imagination was captured by the opportunity to be a CEO, but actually really the opportunity to lead an organization with a remit that's really difficult to find in the private sector. And I will say, as searches are being done for semi-states, there's a piece of trying to at least get candidates to think about that there could be a fantastic role here. It comes with pros and cons. There's no doubt about that. But there are fantastic opportunities in the state sector. I think that question more broadly of how do we get more people to the state sector, there's probably work to be done to ensure that the dynamism that's in some organizations and some of the state sector, and I only say some because I could never say all because I genuinely don't know, but the dynamism that is in some organizations is something to really take in. I have learned more in my years in Coillte than I could ever have imagined around navigating shareholders and stakeholders and the political system and how issues will play out. And I've had lots of issues where you know that if you don't give a particular response by a particular time, it's going to be on Twitter and it's going to play out in a certain way. Reputation management, like there's so much that one can learn in the state sector. It's an awful lot of hard work. It is fun as well. And with the right team around you, I think it can be these roles can be roles that really make an impact. Somehow we've got to get that message out more. And one of the reasons that I was honoured to be asked by Signium, but I was also really happy to have this opportunity to showcase a little of what working in the state sector can be like and can be about, and how it can be a hugely positive experience and really a career building experience as well.
Okay, we might just take one more if we've got one more question. Do you see anybody? Okay. Here we go. We've got Michael Patton here. If we can, thanks, Orla. All righty. It's Paul, actually, is it? Yeah. Is your microphone working?
There we go. Sorry, Paul Lynham, Secto.
We'll get you, Michael.
You spoke about having worked internationally, and I was talking to somebody earlier on about the cultures of various countries. Have you picked up traits from Hong Kong, or you're dealing with the States, that you've brought back and consciously brought into your business here that wouldn't naturally be in Ireland or in the semi-state?
I can't say that I've built up traits, but I can say that my leadership has been deeply influenced by my time in China, engaging with the US, but also time when I was working in Origin Enterprises. Most of my time was spent in Poland, Romania, and the Ukraine. And the types of things that I do perhaps naturally, but maybe they are traits. I'm told if I'm speaking to a team, which is quite a diverse team, I go into a slower, clearer voice. It's just something I do. I'm not sure if that's a trait or not. That second piece, though, it just goes back to that really important fundamental value of mine of respecting people and not judging people. Never, ever judge a book by the cover. And I think that has come from meeting really diverse teams from diverse backgrounds around the world, and never making the assumption as to what somebody knows or doesn't know, or the background they came from, or their education. Take the person as they are, work with them, engage with them, and try to build forward.
Thank you. Okay, just Michael Patton here. If you can get a microphone to Michael, that'd be great. This will be our last question, because we need to feed people now in a few minutes.
Full disclosure, I am recently a member of the Coillte board, but this is not Coillte related, so we'll move on from that. We're living in a world now where we're progressively going through the tipping points on climate change. I think in the last week or so, we've heard that the dieback of warm water coral reefs is now irreversible. Our level of concentration in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is growing at an unprecedented rate. We're actually accelerating, not decelerating. And at the same time, the world seems to be gone soft on climate change. Do you worry about that? And what do you think we as leaders should be doing to actually challenge that and try and get focus back on climate change?
So I'll start by saying I absolutely worry about it. And I worry about it because organisations will be impacted by the planet not being in that healthy state that we need it to be. We are likely going to see more severe storms, more severe floods, and indeed, only recently, the entire forestry sector in Ireland, as a result of Storm Éowyn, has suffered the largest wind blow in the history of Ireland. So economically, businesses are going to be impacted. I then think about worry is one thing. What can I do about it, and what can we do about it? And certainly, day to day, I know that we're working to have an impact, albeit only on 7% of the land of one relatively small country. But from there, I think we have to drive out and communicate why climate action is going to become a bigger and bigger problem, but equally why we need to try and engage and find solutions. The challenge at the moment seems to be that many of the actions required for climate action require, or indeed also biodiversity loss, they require funding. And meanwhile, governments across the world and exchequers are relatively tight on funding. And there is this requirement to do the right thing and do good and plan for the long term. but equally in the very short term for the governments and countries to balance their books. I think we have to continue to push on and to highlight and continue to highlight how this is going to become more and more challenging over time, and why a healthy planet and why a healthy ecosystem are absolutely necessary for the good and health of our people, but also for the long-term viability of business. There is a push-pull here, I will say. A phrase that I heard recently, I'd love to say I invented it, is that you cannot be green if you are in the red. And we have to find a way for organisations to deliver on climate action and for countries to deliver on climate action while also being economically viable. I don't have the definitive answer on how we're going to solve it, but I am definitely concerned that there's a softening, and Michael, you put it very well, that softening in terms of the focus on climate action. And as CEOs and leaders, we have to be willing to get out there and talk about it in some ways like I am this evening, nailing my colours to the mast in terms of why climate action is important to me and why climate action is important to the organisation that I work for.
Thanks, Imelda. Look, it just remains for me to thank you so much for fantastic insight. Really, really good. I think we might give her a gentle round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to have a very short presentation from Therese Coveney on Together Academy. So it's going to start with a brief introductory video. As Gay Byrne would have said back in the day, roll it there, Coillte, but I guess your name is Jack, so maybe you might roll it, Jack. Thank you.
Charlie is just an absolutely great person to work with.
He has great attitude, he works very hard, he's always on time.
He's so in himself, you know what I mean? He doesn't rely on anyone.
Charlie is a very good person and very kind.
He's a real legend. He's outdoing all the brothers. He's making us look bad.
He is kind of charting his own journey through life.
Charlie is an amazing young man with a huge zest for life.
My name is Charlie Awali. My age is 29. I work in here at Be Out. It's best coffee ever in the world. I like the colleagues and my friends. We always do make the coffees and stuff, put the milk in and the food to the table to the customers.
Charlie is our eldest and has always wanted to be busy is his thing, hard work. He's got the busiest schedule in the house. And for Charlie, his big thing has always been, I want a job.
Charlie is one of our original students at Together Academy. He first joined us in September 2021. And in that time, we've seen his confidence grow, his ability to work grow. He also works in our terrific cafe out at Happy Out in Dunleary with his friends, earning his salary and becoming the best advocate that he can for people with disabilities.
We have a team here that is typically developing young adults and young adults with Down syndrome. I feel like you don't need to say that anymore, it's just our staff. That's just the team that work together. Obviously with Together Academy, that's the goal. Everyone works together. Charlie's been one of the young adults with Down syndrome that's really shown. You know, he comes in, he has great attitude. He's currently up there pouring latte art and pulling shots of coffee, which you can see people smile when they just get a heart of latte art from Charlie. You know, it's just a bigger impact.
Since Charlie has started Together Academy, he's really built a lot of confidence. He really takes pride in the job. He's really grown as a person in this world where, you know, he's got some responsibilities and everything working away.
When Charlie first came to us, he was really keen to work in a business in town. He wanted to be a businessman. And one of our best days at Together Academy was when Charlie got his business card.
Charlie came in about a year ago to work with us, and to see the joy that he brings into the workplace, be it through clients or colleagues or whoever just comes across Charlie, it's always a joy and it's always a great experience.
I love BC because BC is best in my life. Amber is really good business. I just did like the deliveries, posts and cleaning the meeting room. I love everything in here.
it inspires us to go and employ more people like Charlie, if that's possible, because it's a great experience and Charlie's just a wonderful person to work with.
Charlie is all about fitness and all about being around his pals as well. So fortunate enough that he's part of Glee Club, which is a dance program, and he absolutely adores it.
At the Glee Club, do like singing, dancing, they're like the boogie.
And then with the gym, he goes up once a week to Kieran and does a one-on-one session.
I do gym, just make me tough, make me stronger.
You know, it's 2 jobs, 4 or 5 sports, as well as training in the gym. And you know, those things do make him happy, and he wants to do that as much as he can. I've never actually met him once when he's not in a good mood. Do you know what I mean? So he's always the happiest man, and he always brightens up everyone's day.
Charlie is the best day of my life. I play soccer together and hockey and basketball. I like him so much because he makes me laugh sometimes.
To see the training that we put around him and the supports we put around him come back to us, and then seeing the value that that brings to him, the purpose of his day being so much more tailored around what he wants and what he enjoys. It's absolutely brilliant.
I love my life because the normal, that's what I want, is pick up myself, stand up myself, get ready for your job, be professional, be independent.
Charlie is a real loving person.
He's a joy to have around here.
You know, he's such a happy guy. And like, if you could get more staff with that attitude, you'd hire them every day of the week.
The impact from Together Academy for Charlie is just transformational. His confidence levels have gone through the roof. We've just noticed him. He's a completely different son.
I don't really have much to say after that. You've all seen what Together Academy does. Just so proud watching back Charlie there and just how much he has contributed to our last few years. We now work with 60 young adults who have Down syndrome in Dublin. 90% of adults with Down syndrome in Ireland are not in paid employment. They'll definitely go along, Imelda, and work at the dinner party that you're going to have at the 6. And I'm going to organise pouring the wine. So that would be very, very nice. They would brighten up that dinner party and add a little bit extra to it. At Together Academy, you've seen from the video, we give industry recognised external QQI level training to young adults who have been precluded from that before. Our guys this evening, some of them are getting a little bit tired. All of them are working today. They're all working this evening, and they're all being paid in their jobs. Things are changing for people with Down syndrome. We have a 14-year-old daughter, April, who's the light of our lives. Don't let her brothers hear that. And she has Down syndrome. And when she was born in Holles Street 14 years ago, we did not know what sort of a future she would have. Next Tuesday in SMBC Aviation Capital, 300 metres from there, we're opening a 5,000 square foot college for adults with Down syndrome. And we are hoping to put 20, 30, 50, 60 young adults with Down syndrome through our courses in the next few years. And they will all be graduating and they will all be looking for jobs. And people in this room can help us with that. So it's really, really important that now that we're providing a new expectation for the lives of adults with Down syndrome, that there is then supports within the business community to see us and support us and allow us into your businesses to see how you can best help us. We're all starving. It's been a gorgeous evening. I'm not going to harp on too much about our work. All I will say is it is an absolute joy to work with these young adults, to see their dedication and the pride that they take in their work. Nobody had to be phoned tonight to make sure they'd be here on time. They're the most reliable bunch in the world. And, you know, I think hopefully in the next few years, you will all get to experience what it's like to work in Dublin with a young adult who just needs a little bit more support to be included and involved. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Therese. I guess the simple message from Together Academy is to make sure that we all appreciate and engage with the contribution that its graduates can make to organisations. So well done you. Finally, just a huge thanks again to Therese and to Imelda and to all of you for coming. We really, really appreciate it. Look forward to chatting with you over our food now and maybe even a drink or two either here or later in the reserve. Thanks again for everybody, for everything. Thank you.